Rick, it's awful nice to see you again after we had such a nice time saluting you not too long ago. I'd like to say, in case there's any doubts in your mind, that
one mind blower after another.
Yeah, well, that's great. I'm happy for you.
Yes, Don.
Couldn't happen to a better person.
Hey, well, that's what I said last time I was on your show, and you disagreed with me.
And we're not doing this for the sake of because we enjoy doing it. We're doing it because it's part of the art. And we're being excluded from the art.
We're not doing this for the sake of because we enjoy doing it. We're doing it because it's part of the art, and we're being excluded from the art. Rick James, the super freak hitmaker known for his larger-than-life persona, had seemingly not had a good time on Soul Train. No, this isn't a wizard of, there are black people here I know, and we make music. And we spend thousands of the whispers range from explosive backstage antics to heated fallout with Soul Train creator Don Cornelius. Himself, well, I've been wrong before, brother. I know I said you would never be nothing. But now I got to eat my words. I said the same thing about you, and that was true. So what really went down did Rick's rebellious nature clash with the show's vision? Or is there a deeper, more shocking story behind his exile? Let's find out. The first time Rick James stepped onto the Soul Train stage, fans were excited, but nobody could have predicted the fireworks that followed from the jump. Don Cornelius didn't hold back during their first sit-down. Don slightly threw shade at Rick's over-the-top image, questioning his bold style and unique personality. It was awkward to say the least. Don's calm demeanor clashing with Rick's high-energy charm. But Rick wasn't one to back down. He fired back with his signature, with leaving the audience laughing, but visibly catching Don off guard. I'm happy for you. Couldn't happen to a better person, hey. Well, that's what I said last time I was on your show, and you disagree with me. Well, I've been wrong before, brother. I know I said you would never be nothing, but at first it all seemed like harmless banter. After all, Rick James was known for his confidence, some might say arrogance, and Don Cornelius wasn't exactly shy about throwing subtle jabs when he felt like it. Fans chalked it up to two big personalities clashing for the cameras. For years, their interactions were like this. Rick would show up in the funk and trade playful blows with Dawn, but behind the scenes, things weren't as lighthearted as they appeared. I hope it's as successful for you, so save your money, because you'll be seeing us on the motion pictures. In one of their most infamous interviews, Dawn brought up Rick's reputation for being, let's say, unpredictable. Rick, clearly annoyed, shot back with a cheeky grin. Unpredictable gets people talking. Dawn, isn't that why you invited me here? The tension was undeniable. But Rick played it off like a pro. Still, insiders began to notice that their exchanges were growing less friendly and more personal. One person wrote lots of violence in that interview. The turning point, many say, it came when Rick openly criticized Soul Train during an interview outside the show. He claimed the platform was stuck in the past and needed to get with the times to embrace newer, edgier acts like himself. Word got back to Don, and let's just say he wasn't exactly thrilled. Sources close to the show hinted that Don saw Rick's comments as disrespectful and decided to quietly distance the funk icon from future episodes. And let's be real, when it came to Rick James, things were always a little too hot for TV. Back in the late 70s, in town, records were struggling, and that's when Rick James stepped in and gave the label a fresh, funky vibe that carried it through to the mid-80s. Even though he hit it big, things didn't stay out for Rick, and his career eventually hit some rough patches. The old timers, the young timers, to the guide them. So I think maybe that's why they have sampled so much. A lot of folks have wondered why things went south for him. Rick James had actually been within town before his big break, but it didn't pan out initially. He grew up in Buffalo, ran away to join the Naval Reserves, and then ditched the Navy for Toronto. There, he joined a band with future Buffalo Springfield members Neil Young and Bruce Palmer, and Goldie MCJ from Steen Wolf. They called themselves the Mina Birds, got signed in town and recorded some tracks, but nothing ever got released. I was a little apprehensive, I was a little, it's different playing place where you never played, and you don't know how the reaction is going to be. You can find footage of the Mina Birds on YouTube, and it's wild to see a young James belting it out with a voice that feels like Mick Jagger in his prime. It's no wonder people couldn't take their eyes off him. Even bandmate Jenkins admitted at heart Rick was a rock and roller, but things took a dark turn for James. One of the band members sold him out to the military, and just like that, he found himself behind bars. The Minor Birds didn't survive the fallout, and the band broke up after serving his time. James packed his bags and headed to Los Angeles, where he fell into some pretty iconic circles. He rubbed elbows with the likes of Stephen Stills, Jim Morrison, and Jay Sebring, the famous hairstylist, who sadly was one of the victims in the Manson Emmers at Sharon Tate's house. Here's the eerie part. James was actually invited to that house on the night of the Emmers, but feeling too wiped out, He turned it down and was found in a bikini-type nightgown with a rope around her neck attached to the body of a man among the other victims were Hollywood hairstylist Jay Sebring and coffee heist Abigail Fuller. Rick James' struggles were anything but simple. They seemed to grow heavier day by day. The new music documentary, Bitch in the Sound and Fury of Rick James, dives deep into his life, peeling back the layers of an icon who lived boldly and chaotically on one side. You've got Rick James, the creative mastermind behind some of the most unforgettable funk tracks of the late 70s and early 80s on the other. There's a man consumed by drugs while living, and an unrelenting thirst for famed director Sasha Jenkins captures this duality, perfectly saying Rick set up a scenario where a happy ending was nearly impossible, being Rick James wasn't. Easy Jenkins had his work cut out for him, telling the story of someone whose incredible talent and joyous moments were often overshadowed by darkness. At the height of his fame, Rick's life intertwined with music legends like Leah Von Helm, Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, and Jim Morrison. But when he hit rock bottom, things turned sinister. He faced accusations of drug-fueled crimes, including and other horrifying acts Jenkins doesn't sugarcoat. It's saying there's so much to unpack with Rick James, but once you start to picture the man begins to come together, the documentary pieces the story together with insights from people who knew him best: his daughter Ty James, his second wife Tanya, his manager, and members of the Stone City Band. Alongside their perspectives of film includes introspective voiceovers from Rick himself, creating a narrative that takes you back to his beginnings in 1950s Buffalo, New York. It was a tough place to grow up, described by Rick's brother in the film as one of the most racist cities in America. Born James Ambrose Johnson Jr. into a family of 8, Rick's life wasn't easy from the start. His father walked out when he was just 10, leaving his mother to support the family by running illegal numbers games. Jenkins explains Rick was exposed to vice at a remarkably early age, but alongside all the chaos, there was music. His mom introduced him to the world of jazz, sneaking him into nightclubs to watch greats like Thelonious Monk and Miles Davis perform, though he had no formal training. Rick taught himself to play and fell hard for music school. Didn't hold his interest, and by his mid-teens, he had dropped out, already knee-deep in drugs and petty crimes that earned him multiple stints in jail. And my mother was kind of moving around at that time, so I only seen her as sporadically when I was small, because she was always trying to do her own career. It wasn't the only thing James experienced at a young age. In his autobiography, Glow, the singer also claimed that he lost his virginity at age 9 or 10 to a local girl 14. He suggests in the book that his kinky nature came in early. Would go on to be a permanent fixture in the themes of James songs and would supercharge his releases like a few artists could match. However, before he would spread out on his own, he would end up performing alongside Neil Young and the Mina Birds in Toronto. He made friends with Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and began to set in stone his vision for a musical career. He founded the Mina Birds, a group which fused together soul, funk, and rock and roll, and quickly became a known face around the city, sparking the kind of wild audiences who become famed for. After moving to Los Angeles, James became a key member of the growing counterculture movement and was more than friendly with the rock set. At the front of that particular chart, Jim Morrison even gave the singer his first acid trip. And the first gig we ever did with him, his first solo, he was like so rambunctious. He was so happy to be playing this music. In 1973, James finally broke out as a solo star. Having toiled with bands and being a silent songwriter for some years, he signed with N&M, where he released his debut single under the name Rick James, My Mama. After forming the Stone City Band, James released his debut album, Come Get It, in 1978, which included a top 20 hit in You and I, as well as Mary Jane, a James classic. He continued to release music at an alarming rate, and by 1981, Street Songs, James' most commercially driven record, hit the shelves. He had already produced 5 albums of astounding funk jams. It was on this album that James enacted his own musical ethos, punk funk, and produced his biggest song ever, Super Freak. The single sold over 1 million copies. And it saw James release 2 more gold albums. But throughout it all, James maintained a troublesome image. And looking back, what was once deemed provocative now feels closer to the singer's overtly S songs, and his insatiable thirst for S made him a difficult entity for the mainstream to ever fully embrace. But he found countless fans on the wrong side of the railway tracks. Things started to go wrong in a truly harmful way in 1989. Following the release of the singer's 11th album, Kicking, the record flopped in the UK, the only place it was released, and James lost his deal with Warner Brothers the following year. By this stage in his career, James's had grown from marijuana in his teens to, and C, by the end of the 80s, the musician was freebasing crack C in his Beverly Hills mansion, even using tinfoil to block out onlookers in a move that one can only describe as cracky figure-out weight. But my point is, when I stopped snorting and started smoking, then that's when my addiction skyrocketed. Because after you had that first hit, it's nothing has it so. It's like a million to the difference is astronomical. Compared to snorting, things took a decidedly darker turn when in 1991 James and his girlfriend Tanya Hijazi were accused of and holding 24-year-old Frances Alley as their hostage for up to 6 days. They tied her up, forced her to perform sex, and burned her legs and abdomen with the hot end of their always-in-use crack-issy pipe. It is the kind of accusation that one expects to hear in a horror movie, not the repertoire one of the finest funk musicians modern music had ever known. He went to prison for doing just that, doing something kind of doing that I believe he like him and his girlfriend like tied-up girl. Burned with crack, James was looking at a long stretch to the singer was arrested and faced a maximum prison sentence of life behind bars if he was convicted of all charges that included A, with a deadly weapon, aggravated mayhem, forcible oral false imprisonment. And usually when faced with such serious allegations, one would keep their head down and try to straighten up. For James, it was quite the opposite. While out on bail in 1993, he was music executive Mary Sager. While under the influence of C, he had met the executive alongside Tanya Hijazi for a business meeting. When Sager claimed the two then and beat her over a 20-hour period, James was found guilty of both offenses, but managed to avoid life imprisonment. After being cleared of the charge, he served 2 years of his 5-year sentence in full in prison, during which he lost a civil suit to SAR and was ordered to pay her $1 million. He wasn't held for long. In fact, he's out. He's free again at this hour tonight. It would appear for the most part. James spent the majority of his life trying to stay under the radar. That is, until 1998, when he was once again accused of SA. This time the charges were dropped at a later date, whether it was his name consistent LYB in the papers or just his incredible connection to Eddie Murphy. And his brother Charlie Dave Chappelle rejuvenated James's career as part of his sketch comedy show, I'm One of the Baddest, all-time one of the best singers, one of the best look ever seen, Hold My Drink James. Featured in the skit Charlie Murphy's True Hollywood Stories and saw Chappelle take on the role of James as he enacted Murphy's stories, providing the now landmark line, I'm Rick James. It saw James take up a role, too, providing narration to the stories, usually punctuating with the phrase, see, as a hell of a D, it was a humorous end to a career continually blighted by his character's depravity, is a hell of a laughter. Drug a continuous stream of women frequented his residence for decades. Despite this, he entered into a second marriage with Tanya, who at the time was the same age as his daughter, a mere 17 years old. While James was 39, this couple with his treatment of women, in general, might lead many today to label James as a misogynist. Jenkins, however, chooses to contextualize him as a man of his time, arguing that the rock and roll scene of that era was inherently misogynistic. He poses the question, how do you have judgment on a man who was reflective of his time, even within the context of his era? James's expressed attitudes often clash with others, including his record company and fellow stars whom he perceived as threats. He harbored a deep resentment towards Prince in the ADS. Believing that Prince had appropriated his act similarly, he initially disliked MC Hammer's You Can't Touch This, which sampled a riff from James' hit Super Freak. Interestingly, his perspective shifted dramatically when substantial royalty checks started rolling in as James's own album sales declined in the late 80s. He attributed the slump to the record company rather than acknowledging any diminishing creativity on his part, influenced by his confrontation with Motown executive during which he issued threats led the label to redirect its promotional efforts toward Lionel Richie instead of James. His lowest point came in the early 90s when he was convicted of various crimes related to the end of women, resulting in a 3-year sentence. At full in prison, the tragic cycle of addiction persisted within Rick James' family, affecting his son Rick Jr., who also grappled with substance dependency. Rick Jr. doesn't feature in the film as he is currently serving a 17-year sentence for what Ty describes as a variety of misdemeanor charges. Only in 2020, James's estate was sued for $50 million by a woman who accused James of her when she was only at a home for troubled youths in New York back in 1979. As of now, the case remains ongoing. James died August 6, 2004, and left behind a troubling legacy. though he claimed to be free from C following his prison sentence. The D was found in his system during the coroner's report. James's personal life was equally intense. His daughter, Ty James, first met her father during his peak of opulence, a life she could barely comprehend. As children, Ty and her brother Rick Jr. were removed from James's chaotic life by their mother, growing up in the harsh neighborhoods of Los Angeles while their father lived like royalty. Years later, a twist of fate reunited them. Ty recalled the surreal contrast. It was a real culture shock. We didn't own a car, and when Rick came to pick us up, it was like, do you want to ride in the Rolls Royce, the Mercedes, or the Excalibur? James's lifestyle was equally jarring. Ty often woke up to women passed out on the floor after wild nights of partying with her dad. It was an uncomfortable feeling, she admitted, but it almost seemed like normal life after a while. Despite his flaws as a father, Ty cherished the fun moments they shared. I was Daddy's girl, she said fondly. We'd hang out and have fun, but at the same time, I became the parent. I was always on guard, watching who was bringing drugs into the house. One particularly harrowing incident left Ty hospitalized after James threw an object at her in a fit of rage. Still, she found it in her heart to forgive him, understanding even as a teen that addiction is a powerful physical and mental force. It's virtually impossible to stop an addict, she acknowledged. Rick was gutted when he introduced his pal Greg Reeves to Neil Young, who promptly hired Reeves to play bass in Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. An astounding bass player himself, Rick had hoped to get the gig. So, music to be like R&B with acoustic guitars. And I ran into Neil, and he's playing a coffee house. I said, wow, that's perfect, you can come, you know. But Rick loathed Prince, reckoning the Purple One stole his act after supporting the punk funker on his first major tour. I think he hated him. I think it was a pressure thing. You know, I think it was more threatened by than hate. Rick and his co-writer, Alonzo Miller, sued MC Hammer for publishing royalties for You Can't Touch This, and won. All three won the Grammy Award for Best Rhythm and Blues Song in 1990. Awkwardly, Rick claimed he'd never have authorized a sample if he'd been asked first. Never mind who you thought I was, I'm Rick James. After giving so much to black artists and the industry overall, his health started to deteriorate. R&B and funk trailblazer Rick James reportedly passed away in his Los Angeles residence. One of his fans wrote, I don't care what anyone says, he was a musical genius. He could play so many instruments, was an amazing producer, and was a great singer. It just sucks that his persona overshadows his immense talent. Another one added, I see what nobody say about Rick James. He's still one of the greatest artists ever and still the king of punk funk. Rick James is a legend. Rick James's life was a whirlwind of success and struggle, marked by the heavy toll of addiction. But as an artist, he was a trailblazer, the super freak, the inventor of punk funk. While history hasn't always given him his due, his influence was undeniable, even on icons like Prince. That audacious bravado was both his greatest strength and his Achilles heel, driving him to dazzling highs and devastating lows.